team that we would put within the general remit of what we're describing here today. So that's 1,801 in 2018, 1,854 in 2019, but in 2021 that was about 2,600 or just over, and then 21-22 2,700 or just over. So you can see the uplift that we've seen. That figure of 70% refers to one specific month, which was August this year. So we're running about across on an annual basis about 32% above pre-COVID levels.
Ken?
Yes, good morning. Great to see this. Really, it certainly appeals to me to see that, we're preventing this. You've answered part of my question there, Nick, about the actual numbers. My worry is, and of course, my community is about the future acceleration with the hard days coming ahead we know are going to be there. Do we actually have the resources to be able to cope if we get a great acceleration in number, and would we need budgetary requirements to allocate more officers if we need be? Thank you.
Of course, it's very difficult to guess what project the future numbers based on the pattern that we've seen. That's a sudden increase. I don't think we've got a current expectation that that's going to increase as a step jump again, but we'll have to look at those trends and how they stand. Part of the design of the early intervention pilot service was to be able to do little and often contact with the perhaps lower threat, the lower risk antisocial behaviour cases. So there is a capability for that to spend less or more time with individual cases, depending on how many cases there are. So we see that as quite an adaptable model. Of course, if we saw a significant increase, then the pilot allows us to test whether what we're doing at the moment would be sufficient to meet the demand coming in. At the moment, the team has been extremely busy during this financial year, even with the additional early intervention and social behaviour officer pilots. The fact that they can resolve something in the order of 80% of cases in one contact with the person complaining and with the person that's being complained about suggests that model works. So yes, if we saw an uplift in the future, I'm not sure we're predicting that at the moment, but we would have to monitor it. But certainly the capability we've got could extend across a slightly larger number. We just have to do less work in individual cases.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Chair. Also, you just asked in terms of budget, and the Section 6.1 is making it clear the resource implications. There isn't a budget moving beyond this pilot period as we go into next financial year. But as Nick's already said, it may well be that PCC, Police and Crime Commissioner, may be able to contribute some. There's other discussions, for example, because of fly tipping and the implications of antisocial behaviour around fly tipping and the work that this is doing around that, then Veolia or other people may be able to provide funding to enable this to extend. So at this moment in time, I think we're quite optimistic about being able to get other funding from other partners to extend this pilot project forward without having to go into our own base budget, which is obviously not what we want to do at this point in time, and allow the project to carry on with this resource for that early intervention into next year. But as I say, very much from those other sources of funding.
Thanks. Sue?
Thank you. Thank you very much for an interesting and readable, understandable report. Spattered throughout the report, you talk about 10, 20% of the cases, 73% of the cases, 92% of the cases. What sort of actual volumes are we talking about, please? And thank you.
Tony might have a little bit more detail, and so jump in if you wish to. During the pilot to date, from the 1st of April to the 31st of October, the two early intervention and social behaviour officers dealt with 811, I think it was, cases between the two of them. Obviously, that frees up our more senior officers with enforcement powers to go and deal with the complex cases and those that can't be resolved as a single hit. So when you see percentages, it's against the caseload as a whole, which is running at about 2,600 on an annual basis. And then in relation to the early intervention and social behaviour officers, we're talking about the 809, 811 sort of cases.
Thank you. I've got other members in, but I've also got myself noted down here as well. I was just picking up on your point, Phil, back to Ken, actually. And also, so the 80% success, perhaps it is in the report, and I've just not seen it this morning. I've still got a bit of a tooth problem. Perhaps I've missed it. But how many cases are you aware of, or you may not be aware of, that where the officers have, been down, done a visit, and then there's been further issues, and then they've migrated through to complaints in regards to the police and involve the police? It's just linking this back up as well with early intervention prevents other services and resources and money, and we all know the resource issues with the police at the moment in terms of their core job, which has been well publicised on the news quite recently. So it's that link. How many are there any? How many are you aware of have migrated through to police? And also, Phil, is there existing at the moment conversations through to the Police and Crime Commissioner in terms of possible 20, 50% funding? Are there already conversations in place for that? Because you seem to be pretty confident about it. So perhaps if Nick could answer the one on the percentage, if there is any, then you come back on that, Phil, if that's possible. Thanks, Nick.
A point that I could have made in the introduction. The police and the council both have roles and responsibilities in relation to antisocial behaviour. We have joint responsibilities under the Crime and Disorder Act, and we have joint powers, or the same powers, under the Antisocial Behaviour Policing and Crime Act 2014. When the council's office closes, then the control room gets a little bit busier at the police, because antisocial behaviour by residents isn't seen as necessarily it's the council problem or it's the police's problem. We are really careful to make sure that what we're dealing with is matters that are appropriate for the council. Right. We're working on a daily basis with our colleagues in the constabulary to make sure that there's a good crossover between the two. So we're not currently having to escalate cases to the police unless what comes in, and often that the symptoms come in very early, as a serious and acute problem of harassment and victimisation. So if that's a criminal matter and harassment act, then that might well be something for the police. So it's a very small proportion, an extremely small proportion, into single-digit percentages or less of cases that would get referred in that direction. Likewise, the police have their powers, and we're just making sure through our closer working that it's the right agency that goes out and can respond quickest. We have had experience where problems are reported to the police control room, that when we become aware of them, there are things that we can do that solves the problem. For example, we've had vehicle-related nuisance where we've managed to capture registration numbers, speak to the young drivers, normally in front of their parents, which has a desirable effect, and stop the nuisance-related activity. Now, you wouldn't necessarily expect the police to be able to respond to all of those things in quite the same way or give them the same lasting attention. So I'm conscious I haven't given you precise numbers, but I hope that helps.
No, that really does help me, because it's all about, early intervention. It's actually probably some of this is preventing things from going on to a criminal issue for the police. And as you say, the resource of the police is stretched in all sorts of ways. So that's very helpful, Nick. And Phil, just in terms of
again, I mean, to be fair to Nick, is those relationships with the police that have enabled certainly Nick again to have that sort of conversation and say, would they be up for funding parts of this because of that relationship and that crossover, and the fact that we're assisting them in the work that is going on. So they've indicated, not had a formal agreement yet, but indicated that they'd be prepared to provide 50% funding for this. So £31,000, assuming it's a £62,000 budget for next year, and then we're looking for other sources of the other 50%. And as I said, because of impacts such as fly tipping, then there are positive conversations that are likely to be happening with Veolia as well in the next week or so. So it's again familiar with the Help Hub, where there are benefits from the Help Hub and that other agencies can then fund that. We'd see this in a similar way, that it's providing a benefit for our residents, but is providing a benefit for other agencies and therefore seeking that funding to secure this pilot for another year moving forward.
Further clarification is really helpful, Phil, actually. Jen, I've got you, Natasha.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you very much for a very comprehensive and impressive report. Just an observation before I ask a question was in relation to ASB and the police, and it's noticeable that certainly recently ASB has been highlighted as a priority for the neighbourhood teams, whereas it hadn't been previously, perhaps. So that's very noticeable. And so perhaps that can be also used in terms of talking to the police about helping out the funding, because obviously it is a priority for them. It's been recognised as such. It's just on page 21, paragraph 4.3. There's you talk about the majority of cases qualify for an early intervention service approach. I'm just wondering what doesn't typically qualify for an early intervention approach, and if there are any implications there in the sense of being able to pick up things that perhaps you wouldn't be able to pick up, but where else, if there's anything to learn from that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. So just on your observation, there are clearly matters which the police has got concern about as a running area of concern, and we'll be looking to respond tactically as well as just routinely operationally in our close working. We get sight every morning at 9:30 of the control room's previous 24 hours of call volume, so we can have a look through and see which of those would be far more appropriate for the council to look at than for the police, and that does bring extra intelligence, so we can try and spot things early before they get any worse. In relation to the majority qualifying for early intervention, clearly if someone calls and there's a long case history, then we don't have much chance of early intervention because there's already a long history to the case. Equally, there might be things that people call about, and there are, which we would describe as normal life, but to them, it's a problem that they would wish the council to get involved in. Those would fall below our threshold for acceptance. So that wouldn't qualify for early intervention either. Some matters that come in clearly are already serious or even acute problems. And just last week, there was a new one, and I won't refer to cases here, so on camera. Will come in occasionally where you first see it and you think that's a problem, and we need to wrap the police, local authority, housing management team, a range of safeguarding referrals, for example. So those are the sorts of things that wouldn't qualify for an early intervention.
Okay, Natasha, Sue, Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, apologies if this information is written down here, but I haven't got my glasses on and I can't see a thing. But is there a designated number or email address for members of the public and also councillors to call to get straight through to who they need to speak to? Because I had an email from a resident which fitted perfectly into this, and it was just after I'd had the presentation, and I thought, perfect, I'm going to test this service out. And it took me about 3 phone calls to get through to who I needed to. Somebody from this council was telling me I should call Norfolk County Council. Somebody else was saying I should call the police. And I'm thinking I can deal with that, but perhaps someone who's more vulnerable in the community cannot. So I'm just wondering, is there a designated sort of shortcut for them to get straight through? This is the number you need to save them faffing around. Thank you.
Yes, there is a direct number to our business support team.
Business support. It doesn't. If I was sort of Googling, I wouldn't think of looking at
No,
business.
I mean, I'm not sure if the telephone number is actually on our website. We want people really to use our web form because that goes straight into the team, and we can then triage those complaints that come in and deal with them in terms of priority. Can I ask what the issue was that your constituent had?
This is all sorts of things, but in the neighbourhood there was drugs, concerns about a child being in front of being a campaign, smoking outside, noise, the usual kind of things. This person had told me that the police had been contacted, but when they turned up, nothing was happening, the child wasn't on the premises. It's hard to know how much is true, but it's one of those things where there seemed to be need for multi-agency input, and I don't know who is involved with what, why further action hasn't been taken. Is it because my resident is exaggerating the situation, or were people just being slack or what? But
again, it's all very well having these services, but if they're not well published and easily accessible, what you have to make it so it's accessible for all. You know, we talk about digital exclusion. Everyone wants to email. Some people would rather make a phone call. Some people, they could be stewing on something for ages and they just want to make that call now. They don't want to think, let me get my laptop out, let me send an email and then wait. They want to speak to someone right now. And, you know, if I was trying, I was in that situation, is this department call? You know, I wouldn't have thought in my head at all, business support, it just doesn't fit the remit of what it is.
Your questions are a fair one, and on reflection, I'm just looking at the website now. The way that we've worked is to encourage people to use the web. Because it will include what's the problem, what's the history, what's the surveillance. It allows us to triage the risk right off the bat, and the results of that form go straight to the team so that they can get cases out. So for speed of response, the form is working very well. It's also provided a lot of background information that characterises the case already. However, your point is perfectly fair one. People would prefer to phone, much as that's a less efficient way of actually responding to the problem. It's perfectly fair to call. There isn't a number on the website, so we'll put it on the website.
Thank you. I think it will reduce anxiety and perhaps de-escalate situations as well.
Bear in mind that there are people who do not have a
It was just to add to it as well. So just to give you assurance, because I've just gone on, thought, well, I'll have a quick look and see what it looks like. If you put in antisocial behaviour, it takes you to all the out, so you don't need to put in business support or know the quirky thing that we as a council call that team. So if you put in antisocial behaviour, it does take you through to the other links. But I think again, it's a valid point in terms of that phone number, and that's something we can easily resolve.
I think that's well appreciated, Nick, as well, actually, because we know this from COVID as well, when how many children are actually completely deficit of using the internet because their parents simply didn't have the internet means to do it, and it was a high number. We know this survey we did in Aylsham and how many computers we supplied in the local community in Aylsham. It's something like 15% of school children at that point, which is a big project in Aylsham. So appreciate that response, and Emma as well. And got Sue and then Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. My point really is on the back of Councillor Hartley, and that is that when you are dealing with the situation as a councillor, whether that's the person dealing with the resident who's got an issue, or in a situation where you need to be able to do something to move the situation forward, you really need the telephone number to hand to be able to do that. So I've got two questions really. This is an experience I had last week with a rough sleeper out in Aylsham. I went on the website while I was with the person, which wasn't easy to do. Signal wasn't very good. Couldn't find a number anywhere to ring. Had a vague memory of we have some sort of service that will help this person during an evening up to about 10 o'clock was my understanding. But as it turned out, I just could not make contact. And I'm a counsellor. I mean, the Reverend in Aylsham would have liked to have tried to help. She didn't have number. I mean, we need to make this so much more focused on why these services exist, and then make them so much more accessible, because in that moment when you're trying to deal with somebody, the last thing you can do is stand there on your phone trying to find something, even if you've got signal. So a plea really, please could we as councillors be given direct line numbers, and can they be the first thing you see on a website page, so that you don't have to try and read all the details of what that service might do or might not do, and try and find the way to contact the office. And also the out of hours situation, at what point would a response be available until in a day? Because most of this is going to happen in the evenings or weekends. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, my mic was on through that, but hopefully it didn't prevent any pickup for you. The case that you refer to would fall to our homelessness service and Richard Dunsire's teams. So that's where that port of call would be. But if you haven't got a contact number for it, then we need to do better to make sure you've got a contact number. And referring back to Councillor Hartley's point, having antisocial behaviour is a matter that's likely to feature in every ward and every parish at some point in time, and therefore having a contact point for that, I can see exactly how helpful that would be. So we'll take your point away to make sure that you've got easy access briefing on what numbers to reach. Just recognising again, we have put some careful design into the website, and about 80% of the case load that comes through on antisocial behaviour comes through the web form on the website. So we know that some people are happy to use it. They'd rather have quick, easy access to a form that they can use, but we might need to promote it better. But your point is perfectly fair. When if you need a number, you need a number. You need to know what it is. So we'll take care of that.
Caroline, then Peter, and I believe that's last, and we'll wrap up.
Morning, gentlemen. I think the last two councillors covered my point with the contact. Personally, I didn't know there was a web form on the site, so I've learned something today. Maybe you could email all district councillors so we can put this out to the community. But I would also like to say I think this pilot is an excellent pilot. It's helped one of my residents, I know, and she was very happy with the service. And I just do hope you get funding to continue this. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, just to say, the design of the service is meant to be designed around what would our customers need if they need us for antisocial behaviour. So it's designed with that in mind and residents tell us, I want you to nip it in the bud. I want you to stop it before it happens if you possibly can do. But I certainly want to know that you'll be quick and that you'll be robust if you come out and have to deal with a situation. So I'm glad that you've had that experience. And I'm sure we would all want that for our residents, our family, our friends, if they encounter antisocial behaviour. Thank you. And we will, together with phone numbers, we'll make sure that the direct link to the webpage that's got the form on it is provided to all elected members, because you can quickly refer residents to that as well.
Phil?
Yeah. Thanks again, Chair. These are really helpful points. Good scrutiny of this pilot. I think in my mind, we will do exactly what we're saying and look at that contact and communication and accessibility to this. The one reservation I have in my mind is that it is a pilot, and there's a danger if we effectively broadcast it very loudly and then for whatever reason, if we didn't secure the funding, then I don't want to almost raise those expectations. And I'm not then undermining everything that we're saying, because we will look at that, but we have got to recognise it's a pilot that we're still modelling and reporting and monitoring on. I absolutely agree with you. We really want to secure that funding. I'm confident we will secure that funding and therefore enable it to be maintained.
Surely, Phil, if you are successful, you will get the funding.
That's why
Fingers
I remain
crossed.
very optimistic. And that's why I'm coming to you optimistically saying I envisage that we will secure the funding, because I think it is a good service and other partners recognise that as well.
Peter?
3 questions, if I may. Well, I can't stay silent for too long, can I? I assume this is a service for both South Norfolk and Broadland. What is the separation in case numbers between the two authorities, is my first question. My second question is, I don't fully understand exactly what is the type of flavour of the cases that you're dealing with. You've given 1 or 2 examples, but I'm not really getting a strong feel for what sort of issues you deal with normally, if normally is the right word to use. And thirdly, to what extent is this overlapping with the police service and also the county council? Is there a danger of duplication? Are we replicating services that already exist or should already exist in order to provide this service? 3 in 1 there.
Thank you. So I haven't got precise numbers in front of me, but I can tell you in broad terms that something in the order of 37% of cases are in Broadland and about 63% of cases are in South Norfolk. Those are my estimated figures. My colleague might tell me something slightly different. He's looking at me questioning way. What would you? I'm going to defer to my colleague who runs the team.
So we're subsidising South Norfolk.
I haven't got those specific figures, but I can certainly obtain them. So I wouldn't want to kind of guesstimate.
So it's approximately 60-40. With 40% of cases being on the Broadland side and 60 on the South Norfolk side. Just to perhaps reinforce the point, where it's early intervention, clearly we'd expect to respond to a broad range of cases for early intervention. Where, on the other hand, we find that there's a serious matter, and part of going to the doorstep is to see, is there a safeguarding, a victimisation, a vulnerability issue? Is there more to this than meets the eye? Is the person complaining actually the person causing the problem? Because that happens sometimes as well. So where cases are more serious and complex, I wouldn't say the proportions sit the same. It's where those cases sit, and they're very individual. So I hope that provides a bit more colour to the answer. And to your second question, which I've failed to write down correctly, and I'm going to ask you to repeat the question. I'm sorry about that.
We have some instances, but I don't get a strong feel for typically what you experience.
Yeah, it's predominantly noise, if I'm honest. So dog barking is probably the number one issue that we deal with. Amplified music, so people playing music in the day. The summer is usually the busiest time for the team because everybody's outside annoying one another. So you've got building work, you've got people in the garden having parties or listening to music, or we get complaints about children playing, which we don't tend to entertain, but people do complain about it. Yeah. I mean, I would say noise is the biggest thing we deal with, but there's other things like cannabis smoking, for example. The pungent smell of cannabis. No, we don't enforce. See, smoking cannabis is illegal. We don't enforce that. The police enforce that. However, we can still intervene and speak to both parties and try and resolve the issue that way. So there's a broad range of things that we do deal with.
And I have got another third question. The second one was in my mind, but forgive me for letting it escape. In relation to overlap with the police and with the county council tends to be less of an on-the-ground operational service in relation to antisocial behaviour. Therefore, our main relationship is with our police colleagues. There are matters which concern both. Harassment between neighbours can fall one side or the other, and the Harassment Act contains more specific powers, so therefore we would always refer to and defer to the police in cases like that. Criminal damage, and arson in particular, to street furniture, to park furniture, we see that on occasion. Those are the sorts of things that we would refer to the police because that's criminal activity. But then there is potentially something that we can do to deter the activity from happening again in terms of patrol type presence. And part of the report refers to the modes in which the officers will respond. Some of those are dealing with individual cases and going direct to an address. Some are keeping an eye on hotspots or, if you like, light touch patrols in areas that might be subject to fly tipping, or they might be subject to an ongoing antisocial behaviour.
Yes. Is that it, Peter? Okay. No. Right, okay. So we'll wrap up now. So just in relation to the recommendations, clearly there's an absolute unanimous view here. I think virtually everybody's spoken in terms of supporting this scheme. And of course, there's a whole range of things that this tips into as well and could be helpful in terms of safeguarding a whole range of issues, actually. Pressure on the police services, etc. Now, it is non-statutory, as Nick has said. And under 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, I know it's an 8.1 that it's brought back to the committee. So on our work programme, we can add that in. And it says here of pilot scheme on 8.3 to be extended until March 2024. So I'm guessing really we're sort of looking at that coming back in before March.
We'll give it 12 months, maybe this time next year.
Yeah. it's just this point as well, perhaps Phil and Nick can just help clarify this so we link this back up. So March is less than 12 months. So the extension goes forward to March. Then what happens in terms of decision makers around whether this continues or not? Because it's on our work program, it's after March, then who knows? So what would be the next step? Sorry, I'm getting my dates mixed up. 24. I do apologise. So yes, no, we're there. Yeah, sorry about that. Got my dates mixed up then. I've got to have this tooth extracted pretty soon. Thank you. So we'll put that back on. So we can come back to that on our work program. Can I just say that we amend 8.3? So we've got. It's a suggestion I'm going to make here because this reflects the conversation actually in the view. To note the proposed extension of the early intervention antisocial behaviour pilot to March 2024, subject to funding being secured. I think if we could just add in there, crossing out the to note, and put something like the ONS committee completely commend the service that's been provided under this scheme and all the interventions that have been made, particularly in regards to safeguarding, etc. And just that we beef that up a little bit in terms of the ONS support for this, and that we do really wish for this to continue and all efforts to be made. And then that just gives support to the officers, all the work that's going on, and also the political side of it. Yeah. Mr. Nurden. Councillor Nurden.
Thank you, Chairman. Just looking at those recommendations, I'm a little concerned about 8.2. We're recommending that we will consider the success criteria. I don't think we've really looked at anything to do with the success criteria, whether that is appropriate or not appropriate. So I'm just wondering why we are going to, well, effectively we're going to look at all three recommendations, but I don't think we've really looked at the success criteria and whether that's appropriate or not.
I thought we had. I thought the officers gave quite a good report there on the success and the criteria around that, Grant, or perhaps it's me. Yes. So.
Yeah, I think the success criteria are covered really well. Interestingly, I think Grant and I were thinking similar lines. I don't think we've considered the success criteria. I think that's the point you're making, isn't it? I guess what I would have wanted to ask is, are you happy that those success criteria are sufficient? Is there anything you would want to change about them? I'm guessing not, but you know, if we're going to consider the success criteria, then we need to consider whether we think that's sufficient or whether there needs to be any additional or whatever.
We would say this because we came up with success criteria. We're happy with the criteria at the moment. We recognise this is a short-term pilot as it stands for 12 months. Subject to that being extended into a second year, we have an opportunity potentially to start to look more at the longer-term outcomes. So the 5 success measures appear to be appropriate. They're all focused on the customer purpose and the impact that we're trying to derive from the service. So we're content with those, and with the data at this present time, clearly we'll keep a close eye on that going forward. But I think the team, in my view, has to be strongly commended for the work that they've done, and they've really taken to this. So it's gone very well so far. So there are longer term outcomes that we would wish to see. I wouldn't build those at this stage into success criteria, but that would be the longer term impact in terms of community levels of safety, reassurance, etc.
And I'm taking it, Grant and Sue as well. 8.2 is actually a link down from 8.1, where it's coming back in terms of review in the future. That's the way I'm reading it, actually. So it's at that point that's included. Okie dokie. So Emma, you're just going to pick up on what we're sort of proposing there.
So I think what you're proposing is on recommendation 3 to remove the to note part and to start that sentence with to commend the service provided to date and propose that the proposed extension of the early intervention antisocial behaviour officer pilot service to March 2024, subject to funding being secured.
Yes, just make it a bit more positive. Yeah. Okay. Seconded, I guess. Yes. Okie dokie. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Okay. And thanks very much once again, and for this work. Much appreciated. And Nick, it's you again on the Help Hub.
Thank you, Chair. We'll just call in my colleague, Senior Manager, who's standing outside at the moment.
Support Hub, sorry. Oh, I'm just being asked for a 5-minute break. So this is a comfort break. We've clearly have a little bit of an urgent need. That gives you 5 minutes, yeah.